Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I love to get together with some of my favorite hunky, husky, hairy, huggable homos on the planet to talk about movies, something that we love quite a bit on this show. And of course, this week is not really a departure from the model that works for us, I guess. We're going to be talking about Dr. Sleep on this week's episode of the Movie Bears podcast, number 300 and something. I don't even know anymore. 343, I think, of the show.
343. Oh my God.
I know, right?
37
and
divided by 1/42. Or
okay.
Right?
And in addition to that, of course, you can't help but talk about The Shining in conjunction with Dr. Sleep. So we'll be talking probably pretty heavily about both films on this week's episode. But in order to have a great discussion, you got to have other participants in that discussion. Let me introduce you to those fine fellas I mentioned just a few moments ago. Jim Pugliafico is here on the show with us. Welcome, Jim. How you doing, babe?
I am. Thank you, babe. And it's great to be back and talking about a movie again. And this week we got Stephen King to talk about.
Indeed, we do. And we've also got Will Lindis here with us. Welcome back, Will. How are you doing?
Oh, good. It's been a hell of a week, but doing good.
Very glad to hear that.
Yeah, you've had a lot going on, huh, Will?
Oh, it's just one of those things where we had a trip to California for Disney and BlizzCon, come back immediately. We're home less than 24 hours, and then the boyfriend has to have his appendix out because he catches it, luckily, before it gets too bad. So it was just a whirlwind of trips and then surgeries and recoveries with a little bit of con crud in our throats and stuff as well. So boy, it's been a lot. But one of the nice things, and sort of adjacent to this show, is with him having about a week off of work and me being under the weather and us both loving movies and having the time to do it, we binged so many movies over this last week, just especially things like related to what we might be talking about today, as well as like a bunch of Terminator movies. Just we just had a good time in the living room watching everything we could.
Well, glad to hear that you're both on the mend. Movies are sweet medicine in that regard sometimes, and I'm glad they had a good effect. We're just coming back from a cabin trip up in northern Arizona ourselves, and you know how crazy it is to get back into work after a prolonged vacation. It's been a little nuts for us here too. So we are excited, Will, to let our powers combine and join forces with you once again to talk movies, and to talk movies with some folks who are with us in the live chat. Looks like we've got a few folks jumping on the stream feed. I don't even know what you want to call it. Pick your own term. Hamstrack says, howdy, y'all. Hey, Hamstrack, good to see you. Welcome. We have a lot to talk about this week. We got Dr. Sleep. I'm sure we're going to talk about some elements of The Shining that play in. We should probably say this up front. There are going to be spoilers for The Shining. So, guys, I don't think we are going to put a spoiler moratorium. That would make it impossible to do what we need to do. But we will talk about Dr. Sleep, spoiler free, for probably the first 15 minutes or so. And then we'll give you a fair warning. We'll give you a heads up before we jump into spoilers for that movie. So if you saw The Shining and you're like, oh, I want to hear about that, I want to talk about that, but I haven't seen Dr. Sleep yet, not to worry. We got you covered. Just, if you're listening live, when we give you that warning, step aside, mute us, whatever, come back for plugs later, or use the handy dandy show notes, that time index Jim puts together for you every week if you're listening through the magic of digital tape delay on iTunes or Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Skip ahead as necessary. Jim, Will, I've blathered on enough. Are we ready to talk about Dr. Sleep and invariably The Shining?
Yeah.
Shine on.
Let's shine on.
All right. I didn't want to...
We're going to be shining.
I didn't want to overlook your readiness for the discussion, so...
That's a really good one. I feel like you've set the bar way high, and I don't know. Maybe we won't quite step up to that bar again, but maybe we will.
I don't know. Things might boiler the top,
maybe.
you know?
Boiler to the top. Nice. Hopefully, it won't be all work and no play for us.
Oh.
Can this just be the show?
No, because I can't keep up with you guys. Come on.
Oh, Jim, you're doing fine. You don't ever have to worry about us giving you the axe over puns.
Ah,
Hmm.
just don't snow me under, okay?
You're too adorable for that, babe.
I would say that this whole exchange is very amazing, but
Good one, Will. All right. We don't want to blow our load of puns before we even get into the discussion. So,
Yeah, let's not blow all our steam on this one.
all right, everyone. Here we go. Our discussion of Doctor Sleep, and also probably The Shining. All right, Will, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of spoiler-free, of course, setup for Doctor Sleep, and give us your thoughts. Was this something that you think people should check out in theaters, maybe watch on their favorite streaming service when it becomes available, Redbox, Skip? What do you think?
yeah. So directed by Mike Flanagan. This is the same horror film director who gave us The Oculus, Gerald's Game, and the critically acclaimed The Haunting of Hill House that everyone was talking about just last year. Um, this is Doctor Sleep, which is a sort of a weird film to discuss because it is both the sequel to the 1980 classic film and what I would consider to be one of the best films of all time, which is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, as well as being an adaptation of Stephen King's 2013 novel follow-up, Doctor Sleep. Um, the plot is, so this is the years following the events of The Shining itself. We've got a now adult Dan Torrance, not Danny Torrance. He's dropped the Danny and become just a Dan because he's a professional dude.
He's an adult now.
He's an adult now, and he's not a Danny. He has to protect a young girl with very similar powers from this cult, who also have similar powers and who prey on children with those powers so that they can remain immortal. I think what's sort of interesting about this film is how it tries and, in my opinion, succeeds in threading multiple needles at once. Stephen King is very, very famously negative about Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. He's been very vocal about this fact over the years. This wasn't his vision. He appreciates it as a movie, but he doesn't like how it adapted his material. The problem is it's also one of the best films of all time. And he tried to course correct a little bit of those elements in the book. I love Stephen King, a little passive aggressively. What I think director Mike Flanagan does so flawlessly here is reconcile both the visions of both of these legendary creators. The legacy of the film remains very intact and interwoven, along with some of the new elements of the book. Those are preserved as well, creating something that's wholly different from The Shining and from Doctor Sleep, yet which is born of both of those source materials. What is it that I love about this? Well, there's a lot. Ewan McGregor is the lead here. He's Dan Torrance, and he plays the role with a lot of gravitas. He's just a man that is just worn down by all of the shadows cast upon him by his family and by his own history. We've got newcomer Kylie Curran. She has a ton of heart and spirit as the young Padawan to Dan's Shining Jedi, I guess. Shout out to the casting of the incredibly capable Indigenous actor John McLarnon. He played a very formidable baddie, the Crow Daddy in this. And for me, probably one of the most exciting villains of the year is Rose the Hat. She was just, pardon the pun, breathed to life by the amazing Rebecca Ferguson. In addition to the cast, there's these throwback shots referencing events from the first film that feel both welcome and inspired. You've got the music that has that same unnerving resonance, that throbbing that just sort of like gets underneath your skin and just makes you feel so uncomfortable. And you've got this atmosphere that is just terrifying. Look, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I love his books, but this now makes two in a row of books about the Torrance family where I think the movies have upstaged the books pretty spectacularly. As a horror film fan, it makes me so excited to see a mainstream horror film that turned out to be this damn good. And listen, I think it's going to very obviously be compared to The Shining, and this movie isn't The Shining. This movie is not one of the best films of all time. But if you're going to make this sequel, and you know that you can't be one of the best films of all time, you at least need to be really damn good. And I think that's what this film is. It's really damn good, and I would highly recommend it.
All right, so we got a pretty big recommend from Will here. Jim, how about for you? Did what Will shared resonate with you at all? Are you on the opposite end of the spectrum? Are you in the middle? What do you think?
I'm definitely not as high on this movie as Will. I didn't hate this movie. This movie had, but thinking back on it, this movie had kind of took on by itself an impossible task. I mean, it tried to recreate the magic of The Shining, and in parts of this movie, tried to even insert parts of The Shining that were, let's just say, recreated. I think those are problematic for me in terms of enjoying the movie. We'll talk we'll get into spoilers and we'll talk which portions. I kind of, this movie was trying to serve two masters, and I wish it had maybe kind of done its own thing. I wish he had stuck with, I wish he had left a lot of Shining stuff kind of out of the story, and gave a little bit more credit to the audience in terms of what they might remember from that movie. Because I think the new stuff is pretty well done, pretty good. Even though I had some issues with some of the rules that weren't super clear, but like I said, that part of the movie with the new stuff, Rose the Hat, and the gang, and what they're doing within the story of Dr. Sleep and the adult Danny, I thought that was all good. But when it seemed like it was trying to kind of lean on The Shining a little bit too much, and I think every time it did for me, I think it actually lost a little bit of itself. It just didn't work, mainly because the recreated scenes felt exactly that. Like, as soon as I'm looking at it, I'm comparing it in my head, and I couldn't turn it off. It was like I kept comparing it in my head, like, oh, that kind of looks like Danny, at the Overlook, but then again, I know it's not him, so I don't know if they're going to do something different, or it just didn't. It took me out of the movie for those scenes, unfortunately. But like I said, the other stuff was fine. I'm going to have a problem not recommending this to people who want to see it because, I think a lot of people did like this movie, and I think there's enough in there to like. It just, as a whole, it was kind of a big mess for me. It didn't come together. I thought it was overly long, at over 2.5 hours, and it felt that way for me by the end. So yeah, it didn't work for me. I'm going to say not recommend, but I really don't want that to kind of discourage people from seeing it if they want to, because it might be right up their alley and something that they like. But for me, it just didn't work.
All right, so we got a big not recommend from you, Jim?
Yeah, I would say not recommend.
All right, so it seems like we have two polar ends of the spectrum. Hey, I want to just check in real quick, the magic of doing this live with our listeners. We're getting some reports that we're sounding kind of crackly. Those of you in the live chat, if you could let us know, are we crackly and distorted for you guys? Help us out a little bit. Let us know if you don't mind. But, Jim, so not recommend from you. Will, big recommend from you. I think I fall somewhere in the middle between you guys, and I mean, that's a great place to be. I'm okay with being in the middle. I liked this movie. I don't think I loved this movie. And Hamstrack makes a really great comment in the live chat. And I don't want to read too much in case it's kind of a spoiler for some folks, but to summarize in a way that's safe, he mentioned it almost feels like it could be two movies in a way, like just thematically, plot-wise, you could separate it into two different films. And I would agree with that. I would say that the stuff, it's so hard to talk about spoilers, but the stuff for me that was a direct like callback to The Shining that was connective to that was 100% all aboard. Totally loved that. The other stuff, with the little girl, and as much as I love Rose the Hat-Will, I agree she's a fantastic character. Um, that whole plotline didn't work as well for me, at least initially. When we kind of get to toward the end of the film, I was much more on board with it. But this one for me, it's definitely a recommend. I would say you probably don't have to like go see it in theaters though. I mean, if you wanted to wait for this one to come to VOD or rental or something, I would say that's perfectly fine. But I mean, if you want to fire up your old copy of The Shining and then follow it up by watching Doctor Sleep, I think that could serve you well. So, yeah, I guess, I don't know. Do I balance this out a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, I think you did. I mean, we watched, we went and watched The Shining the night before we went to see this movie, and I was just reminded of how amazing that film really is. And yes, it's an old film. I mean, it was put out in 1980, but it plays really well. I mean, its tone, unwavering throughout, is one of this dread and terrifying, just like scariness, and it works really well. I mean, Kubrick's vision, regardless. I know Mr. King didn't like it, but man, and I haven't read either novel, so I can't really compare the novels. Will, I know you probably have read both novels, but I will say that, like I said, I think being saddled with just a masterpiece film to try to both follow up and also in parts of your movie duplicate, I almost think it's an impossible task, and this movie showed how hard that really was. The new stuff that he did, I thought worked really well, but yeah, I like I said, I found myself taken out of the movie a couple times. There were some amazing moments in this movie that had nothing to do with The Shining. There's and I won't spoil anything, but there's some terrifying things that happen in this movie that really I'm watching a certain scene unfold and I'm like, okay, wait a minute, this is like getting too much. Like, this movie is really pushing the line, even for me. And you guys know what I mean in terms of that one scene. It just was pushing the line too much. So yeah, I don't know. When we get into spoilers, we can definitely talk about more.
All right, awesome. Hey, we're going to take a pause for a second while we try and figure some things out with our audio. Thanks so much for everyone who's letting us know that it's pretty crackly and almost unlisten-toable, which is very unfortunate. But we're all going to take just a quick break here. We're going to mute on audio and video just so it doesn't come into the feed, and we'll be back shortly. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Hey, Will, you there?
Hey guys, please mute audio and video, and we'll just be in the chat.
Oh.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being patient with us as we try and figure out what's going on. Unfortunately, as much as we love YouTube, it's really thrown some problems at us in recent history, and we've been trying to get around them, and it seems like we're having some struggles. If you folks wouldn't mind doing me a favor, just let us know if the audio is sounding okay at this point. We may have to completely disable video and just go audio only in order for this to work. Hamstracked in the chat says it sounds good now. I'm hearing from Sam, who also says that it's working. So, okay. Well, then maybe we're able to rock and roll with this the way that it is. We'll see. Unfortunately, guys, I'm so sorry. You won't be able to see us on video. We thought we had this problem licked, but I'm going to save any and all expletives about the service we're using for after the show. In any event, all right. I don't even know where we were. I'm completely thrown at this point. The joys of doing this live, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, we had been talking about how how it worked for me, but also I've been hearing and seeing things that this movie didn't really do that well this week.
So real quick, Jim, I'm so sorry. Will brought up a great note. Unfortunately, the show is unusable the first 30 minutes that we recorded. We won't be able to turn that into a good audio episode. So I guess we're going to have to start over completely from the beginning, and maybe just can video. Maybe just get rid of video going forward on this show. Unfortunately, we'll have to figure that out. But yeah, I guess we're going to start all over from the top. Sorry, guys. Thanks so much for your patience. And we'll just try and replicate a 30-minute discussion we just had. But here we go. Hello all and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos to talk about something we love a lot of. That, of course, being movies. With me, as usual, are my co-hosts Jim Poliafico. Hey Jim, how are you?
I'm here. I'm doing okay. Here we go for round 2. Let's do it.
All right. Our listeners have no context on the new audio episode.
I know, that's okay.
About round 2, so I wasn't even going to mention it. But yes, we tried to record a version of this episode already. We had some audio issues, so we're working on round 2. Will is here with us as well. Welcome, Will. How are you?
Hey, doing okay. It's been a hell of a week. I know that you guys know this because we've talked about it a lot through chat, but the boyfriend had appendicitis this week. It absolutely sucked. He had a lot of pain in his side as he was coming back from a vacation. So we took him to the hospital. He is better now, but we've used the opportunity to spend some living room movie watching time together, and it's been a good bonding experience.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that he's okay. I know that's definitely kind of scary, but glad you were able to binge some movies and take advantage of that downtime. Unfortunately, we have kind of a hard stop tonight, so it's going to be in a bit of a abbreviated show as we re-record here. But we have a big discussion this week, of course, that being Dr. Sleep, and invariably we're going to be talking about The Shining as well. Just a heads up, we will be spoiling The Shining, so hopefully you've seen that movie. It's fairly old at this point. Hopefully you've had a chance to do so. If you've not yet seen Dr. Sleep, we will, of course, talk about that movie spoiler-free for the first 10 minutes or so, and then we'll give you a fair warning before we take you to Spoiler Town on that. Jim, Will, I know we've had a lot of difficulties tonight from the technical end of things, but are you ready to talk Dr. Sleep?
Yeah.
Let's shine on.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Get that pun in.
Sounds good.
There we go. Got one of the puns back.
All right. There were about 50 we'll never get back, but that's okay. We got one. Maybe more will drop over the course of this abbreviated episode. In any event, here we go. Our discussion of Dr. Sleep. All right, Will, if you don't mind, of course, abbreviatedly, if you could give us a little bit of setup for Dr. Sleep, and was this worth seeing in theaters, waiting for rental, or skipping entirely?
Yeah, so this film is Doctor Sleep, directed by Mike Flanagan. He's the horror film director who's given us things like The Oculus, Gerald's Game, all things that we've reviewed here on the show, and of course the critically acclaimed Haunting of Hill House that everybody was talking about just about a year ago. Doctor Sleep is it's a weird little animal because it's the sequel to the 1980 like one of the best films of all time, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, as well as the adaptation to the 2013 Stephen King follow-up, Doctor Sleep itself. The plot goes the years following the events of The Shining, the now adult Dan Torrance has to protect this young girl with similar powers as him from this cult who also has similar powers. This cult preys on children with those powers so that they can remain immortal. What's so amazing about this film is how it tries and succeeds to accomplish a few things at the exact same time. It has a lot to carry on its shoulders. Stephen King has been very famously negative about Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. He's gone on record about how it wasn't true to his vision, and in fact, he even wrote Doctor Sleep as a sort of a fix to the things that Kubrick, in his eyes, did wrong. What I think Mike Flanagan does so flawlessly here is reconciles the visions of Kubrick and King together. He takes these two legendary creators, he takes the chocolate and the peanut butter, and he squishes them together into something that is very different than either of the two pieces of source material, but is somehow still very, very, very good in its own way. I love the performances. Ewan McGregor kicks ass as Dan Torrance. He's got a lot of gravitas as he's carrying all of these like scars from his family and from his past with him. We've got, for me, probably one of the most exciting new villains of the year in Rose the Hat. She is just, she's so flawless to me. Rebecca Ferguson just breathes so much light, pun intended, into this character. You've got great throwback shots referencing the events from The Shining, which I think work very, very well in terms of where they're used. The music has that same unnerving resonance. It's still got that great atmosphere. As a Stephen King fan, I'm excited for this. As a horror fan, I'm overjoyed that we have a mainstream horror film that is this damn good, that I hope more and more fans will be able to sink their claws into. So this is very, very, very highly recommended from me.
Awesome. Got a big recommend from Will. Jim, how about for you?
Yeah, I'm not so high on this movie, although there are many things about it that I did like. There are just as many things that kind of took me out of the movie. The things that I liked about it were the new story, the Doctor Sleep storyline, the characters. I liked the tension. I liked some of the elements of terror that the new aspects of the story brought in. What I didn't like was its leaning upon The Shining so much, because I didn't think those scenes worked really in any way. It felt like just a dress up version of I don't know, just like a dress up repeat version of The Shining, some of the scenes in there. And it didn't come across real well for me. It took me out of the film. But we'll talk about some of the things that I really liked about the movie. I didn't like the fact that it was over 2 hours and 30 minutes long. I thought that was way too long for the film. And again, maybe if they had cut some of those things that I thought really weren't necessary to the Doctor Sleep storyline that had more to do with the Shining storyline out of this movie, I think it could have been tighter and even better than it was. So for me, it's not really it's a movie that didn't work for me, although I can't unrecommend it for everybody because I think some people are really going to dig it. Just for me, it was a bit messy and didn't come together.
All right, so we got a big recommend from Will and a big not so recommend from Jim. I guess I kind of fall in the middle between you guys. For me, I like this movie. I didn't love this movie. We rewatched The Shining, and I don't know, maybe that was a mistake. We rewatched it right before we went to see Doctor Sleep, and this movie definitely has some big shoes that it's trying to fill. It's pretty ambitious to do a follow-up film to Kubrick's The Shining. I do like, though, that Flanagan tried to fix some of the issues with Stephen King's problems with The Shining, I think, in Doctor Sleep, as well as remain faithful to the book. 45 minutes ago, Hamstracked in chat had a great comment about how this movie almost could have been divided into two different movies plot-wise, and I would completely agree with that. One of the plots that served as kind of the direct like follow-up to The Shining stuff really worked well for me. Will, you mentioned Rose the Hat. As much as I like her character, all the crap about the Shine vampires or whatever, I really could give a shit about. So that didn't work so much for me, even though I did like kind of the, I don't know, we'll talk more about it in spoilers at the end when the two things kind of maybe converge, question mark. But I think, I don't know, this movie was 2.5 hours long, something like that. It felt about 4.5 long to me. By the time the movie was over, I was just so ready to be out of that theater. But I was entertained. I was engaged. I would definitely recommend this one if you're a fan of The Shining, but I would say you probably don't need to go see this in theaters. In fact, being able to pause it when you get bored and go do something else and come back may help your viewing, depending on what kind of movie watcher you are. But maybe check this out when it becomes available on VOD or Redbox it for $1 or something. I think it's still fun. There's still some cool pieces. I just think it could have been a lot tighter. And I don't know. I haven't read the novels, so Will, just to confirm, have you read both of them?
I have read both novels.
Cool. So when we get into spoilers, maybe you can be our resident expert. I'm really curious to hear how some of the things Flanagan did supposedly fixed some of the issues. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that when we get into spoilers. But guys, anything else very quickly you want to get out non-spoiler wise before we open that can of spoilers?
One thing that I think is interesting, especially in the era right now where there was just an announcement the other day where they're doing a new James Dean movie using full CGI re-enhancements of the actor, and it's caused quite a stir right after we had the Tarkin stuff and Paul Walker and all these different people have been digitally recreated for film. For me, it was refreshing to see a film that instead of using a lot of that style of stuff, that used look-alike actors to play some of these parts without having to do like full CGI textures and stuff like that. Like, I think Flanagan was sort of doing the old-fashioned way of doing an older character reenactment, and I appreciated that, and I want to see more of that as opposed to, unfortunately, I think the direction we're heading.
Like I said, that's an impossible area to do. You're not gonna remake scenes from The Shining with look-alike actors and not have it come across as, oh, that's a look-alike actor doing a scene from a movie that I really liked, not as good as the movie that I liked. So it was really strange for me watching those scenes, and several of those scenes were maybe earlier on in the movie, and that's maybe what kind of took me out of it a little bit. And those actors, those actors are not bad actors. It's just they're put in a situation of mimicking characters that are so burned into our collective psyche that you just can't. I don't know. It just couldn't come across as believable to me.
I haven't read much into this. Maybe one of you guys know. Was it a conscious decision of Flanagan's, like, not to reuse like the old footage and just kind of like use a flashbacky like haze gauze effect or something to iron out the differences in like picture quality? Like, or did he decide to like recreate these scenes for a specific reason?
So I know why he didn't do the CGI style. I can only guess as to why he did the to do the scenes to begin with, and that guess comes from the fact that there are some, even in the flashback sequences, there are some new perspectives, like new things that happen in the past, and so instead of infusing old looking actor, like the original actors, with also new actors playing like the continuations of those scenes, they just reshot those so that there would be a little more continuity within this film itself.
Interesting.
Like I said, I don't know if like the CGI de-aging thing, whatever that would have worked if they could have even tried that. There were probably rights issues that they couldn't use actual scenes from The Shining, perhaps.
Well, I know also with Shelley Duvall, she's been kind of in the news a lot with her health and some of the unfortunate things that have been happening with her over the last few years. And I think that there's also maybe a taste issue in terms of doing a CGI reenactment of her, sort of based on kind of all of that stuff.
Well, just to be clear, I'm not talking about the like Captain America, Chris Evans de-aging technology. I mean, like just using a scene from The Shining, and like I know that the picture quality is going to be different, even with the 4K remaster that's come out. It obviously doesn't look as good as Doctor Sleep, but a lot of times when you use an old piece of footage, you know, if it's a flashback or something, you can add like a visual effect, like that makes it clear it's a flashback. It looks like a stylistic grain as opposed to like this was shot on completely different film technology. But Will, you do make a good point. There are a couple of little things that are different. I guess if Flanagan really wanted to go back and do those things, which I don't think really made that much of a difference, but I guess that explains the stylistic choice. So
I think there's one sort of like set of notable scenes that happens fairly early on with young Danny in the aftermath of what happens at the Overlook. Some of the interactions that he has sort of in the kind of the weeks and months after the events of The Shining, where they needed to show that because you had to set up how he learned a specific trick. And if you're going to show that, then if you're going to show any flashbacks, then you have to deal with the fact that it's a different young looking actor. So I think that was probably the catalyst point right there.
Right. I don't know the way around it, which would have made more sense. This could have been the best way, but it was still, for me, it was distracting and like, it was a layer between me and the film, like, of like, hey, I see what you're trying to do, but it's not working for me.
Well, it's unfortunate that we don't have video capability right now, because I want to demonstrate for you how well they got the Shelley Duvall stand-in with her running. Oh.
They did that.
They nailed it.
That actress, I think, was one of my favorite parts of the film, to be honest. Like, for me, I ended up more positive on the reenactments, primarily because of her. Every time I saw her on screen doing something, I would love to see a behind-the-scenes thing of just her practicing the mannerisms and practicing the way that she would hold a baseball bat or hold a knife, or the way that she would say a specific line, because even though she doesn't look exactly like Shelley Duvall, she doesn't. I felt like more so than a lot of actors I've seen, she really embodied what Shelley Duvall did with Wendy Torrance, and I was just blown away by that.
She was the closest for me. I mean, in terms of like these impressions that these actors did of the characters, I think she was the closest of the four major ones that were in the movie, I think.
All right. Well,
I'll just leave it at that. Just four.
It's getting increasingly difficult to talk about this film without getting into spoilers. So, Jim, Will, how do we feel? Are we ready for spoilers?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, excellent. Spoilers for Dr. Sleep are officially fair game. This is the part where I ramble awkwardly for 30 seconds. If you're listening live, this is your chance to come on back later after you've seen the movie if you care about spoilers. If you're listening through the magic of digital tape delay on Spotify or iTunes, that'll be later this week compared to when we record. So there'll be a nice time index there that you can use to skip around as needed. But spoilers, we are absolutely good to go. Where do you want to start, guys?
I know that I think that you had mentioned it before, some of like the differences with the book, and I think that sort of sets the tone for some of the decisions that were made here. So if you'd like, I can talk a little bit about the big things that they swapped up.
Sure, please.
Well, go ahead, Will.
So in The Shining, the major thing that happens at the end of the the Shining book, and this is part of what Stephen King doesn't care for as much, is the Overlook gets blown up because Jack Torrance has a change of heart and he blows up the boiler room, sacrificing himself to save the family. He has sort of like a heroic turn at the last moment. The movie obviously didn't have that.
Hmm.
Jack Torrance famously dies out in the snow. The Overlook persists, etc. So that moves us over to this story, Doctor Sleep, where at the beginning of that book, well, the Overlook's gone. There's no Overlook. That legacy of that still exists, and I would say that more or less the first two-thirds of the book and the movie are of Doctor Sleep are fairly faithful to one another, barring a couple of minor things. But you'll notice at a certain point in the movie they go back to the Overlook Hotel. They go back and have a big showdown there, facing down some of the same demons and stuff. And the book itself, they do go back, but there's just a little campsite there, and there's like a fight that includes the characters like fighting on a thing, and then one gets hurled over the side, and you don't get any of the sort of the callbacks to like sort of like what the Overlook did, the ghosts. You didn't have as much reconciling of Danny with his alcoholism, even though that is still a thread. So it's really that last the everything that kind of happens back at the Overlook changes things around dramatically.
So they do go back to the site. They just obviously there's no hotel there in the book, and in the movie you pretty much have the full hotel just kind of abandoned and quote unquote left to rot. I think they said in the movie, which I mean, that's again what I'm talking about is kind of leaning on the audience's love of The Shining and knowledge of The Shining. For its own use in the story, and I don't think it helped the main story for Doctor
But
Sleep.
here's the thing: like, if you didn't have those things, like you just have Dan saying, "Hey, I was the kid from back then," like you wouldn't have enough of a direct connection, with those events. Like it would be a very, very like weak standing sequel. If you couldn't call back to those things like that. So, Jim, I totally get it. And as someone who like, I don't know, the line between like good service and fan service these days is very thin for me. I feel like this movie kind of straddled that balance well enough that it didn't like bother me so much. Although JP Wendell in the chat says the actor playing Jack left a bit to be desired. And Jim, I think this is where some of your complaints about the recreation stuff kind of come into that. If you're gonna have some callbacks to The Shining by having things taking place with Shining characters, that guy looked like Jack Black. He did not look like Jack Nicholson. And so, when that whole serious conversation's going on between Dan, who's struggling with his alcoholism, and like seeing his dad, the whole time I'm thinking of Jack Black and Jumanji instead of like this very serious thing.
He looked a little bit like the kid from E.T. for me. I don't know.
He was.
Well, of course he was.
Yeah. No, it's just that. No, I get your point. I just thought that was a cool little trivia point. That
Yeah. He's been in a few other movies too. It's funny because I've seen him in movies and I can usually recognize him, and he was unrecognizable as what's his name? Thomas. What's his name? What's his first name? Something Thomas.
Henry Thomas.
Yeah. Because they had him made up so much to try to look like Jack Nicholson, a young Jack Nicholson, and he didn't really. I mean, they put the eyebrows on him and the sideburns, and they filmed him from profile most of the time, and tried to pass it off. But it's okay. I mean, it probably would have been better if they had found like a Lloyd lookalike and not had the daddy scene. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if the daddy scene was important to that, other than it was him overcoming his addictions and stuff. I get all that, but I don't know. It's very weird.
What we got a little bit more of here was the book itself is more about like Rose as the villain, and that's sort of where it ends with that. Here the Overlook stuff. I'm much more partial to it because I think, to Brad's point, like this is not just the adaptation of Doctor Sleep. This is the sequel to The Shining, and I think that it's going to I don't know that I would necessarily classify it as much fan service to like incorporate some of those elements from the film, which there's a lot of people who didn't read either of the books and only have the movie that they saw as the source material. And what I liked here was I said the reconciliation. This movie ends with Dan the book, Dan just sort of survives and he's fine and everything's okay. There's no boiler, there's no anything like that. He just makes it out okay. Here, the ending that Dan got, the sacrificing himself to blow up the Overlook and save the younger person, that's the fate that his father had in the book. That's the reconciliation, and I think that um, I think for me, and part of maybe this is why I had a stronger reaction to this film, is having read both of the books and seen the movies. It was sort of interesting to see this person sort of take all of the better elements and just weave them into something that sort of, I don't know, like sort of fixed a lot of the things that King had a problem with while also still being very true to the Kubrick original. I think that was the magic for me.
Yeah, and I get it. I don't know why he would try to quote unquote fix anything from what a lot of people think of as a perfect movie. Other than Stephen King, a lot of people think that The Shining is a perfect movie and there's nothing to fix. So just go on from that. Right?
Flanagan wasn't fixing. Let me rephrase. Flanagan wasn't fixing anything that Kubrick did, but he has this adaptation that he's making the film for, that is a retcon of the movie, and so he has to take that and pull it back up to some of the movie stuff without shitting on the new book, because that I mean that would be a little insulting, I think, to King too, just to say, well, yeah, I've got this other adaptation and completely fuck you, we're gonna do this. I think what he did was he found the best elements from the story and he elevated them up to some of the story elements from The Shining. It wasn't that he was fixing the Kubrick stuff, he was fixing the King stuff. In a way that made King happy. Like, I think that's there's some magic in what he pulled off there.
Yeah. I want to talk about something that really worked for me. Jacob Tremblay shows up in this movie. Totally unexpected. I didn't even know he was going to be in this movie, actually. And he's in the scene, and I'm like, we kind of whispered to each other in the movie theater, like, is that Jacob Tremblay? Oh my God, it is. And then to see what happens, and of course, in this film, we're in spoilers now, he is brutally and terrifyingly kidnapped, tortured, and murdered, like right in front of you. And it was, I mean, I'll admit, I'm no fan of kids in movies and, but I don't know, the way they portrayed that murder was really bone chilling. Like it was, as Hamstrak says in the chat, he said, because the kid looked like a relative of his, it was very tough to watch. And I'll admit, I mean, this kid didn't look like any relative of mine, but it was still tough to watch that scene. And so kudos to Tremblay for coming in and being able to do a scene like that and pulling it off and making it so probably one of the most terrifying scenes in the movie for me.
Yeah, I had no idea he was even going to be in this. Like, he wasn't like any of the marketing that I saw. And arguably, Jacob Tremblay is probably one of the most notable child actors working right now. I mean, he was the Marquis in The Good Boys that came out earlier this year. He was the kid from Room. Like, this kid's been in a lot of things in pretty major roles. And so for him to be able to step into this more minor role, it threw me off a little bit, because, again, I knew that this character was only there to die, and all I could think about was, like, are they about to switch some shit up on me? Like why did they put Jacob Tremblay here? Like, are they gonna do something crazy with, like, I had no idea. It was I sometimes like when you see a more notable actor show up in just sort of a bit role, because I think it fucks with expectations in a good way. It
was a bold move, and I think it worked really well. Probably I hate to say it's the best scene of the movie for me, but I think it was the most effective scene of the movie for me in terms of ratcheting up the horror of this film. The other thing I wanted to mention was a little bit overuse of the thing that The Shining had, which was the kind of the heartbeat, thump thump, like background soundtrack, I guess, if you will, in a lot of scenes. I thought it was a little bit overused in some spots, but otherwise, I don't think the score was that remarkable. Some echoes of the Shining theme, obviously, but otherwise not much new to grab onto there.
Yeah, it felt like a lot of the, for me at least, I think some of those elements worked very well because it felt like putting on like a comfortable jacket, just like,
Mm-hmm.
or, an old pair of shoes, that sort of thing. Just like those things, like it reminded me of what I was doing, what I was watching, where I was within the story. And I think because so much of this film is about sort of like the legacy of the past catching up to you, like that's Dan's arc, all
Mm.
of the stuff that he experienced at the Overlook, like with the ghosts that he locked away and all of the trauma he experienced there, as well as his alcoholism, which is both a tribute and a symptom of the experiences that he had with his father. It became like, even in the AA meetings, it became like this really tough thing for him to untangle, kind of like, how he felt about his father and how it kind of led him to the road. With legacy being so important to the character of Dan and his journey, I liked that some, like, kind of the heartbeat of the past was still kind of pulsing through the veins of this
Mm.
movie, as it pushed through the
Well,
present.
and it's
Yeah.
interesting too. Like, Hamstrack mentioned earlier, like the two movies, like you could kind of separate them. So I'm watching the whole middle thing with Rose and her crew, and Jim, you made a funny post on Facebook the other day about an evil yoga instructor and her band of students go on a vaping addiction field trip or whatever. Like that whole stuff, I was pretty checked out for. And then, you know, once they decide to like set the trap up at the Overlook, we get like almost a shot for shot recreation of the opening like helicopter fly up to the Overlook, right? Except this time it's at night and everything is different and the music kicks in. And it was like when that happened, I was like, "Oh my god, this is the movie that I signed up for. This is what I wanted to see." And I know that's not for everybody, Jim. I know the fan service, fan wink,
Hmm.
whatever stuff was probably too much for you, but I don't know. I really dug that. And when we finally got there, it was really neat to see Dan as an adult now trying to sort of reconcile and deal with some of the things he left behind, literally locked in boxes, right? And I thought it was so neat that final battle with Rose starts in Dan's mind, in the maze. Like you think, you know,
Yes.
Hmm.
and that was so cool. And like it kind of leaves you guessing. You're not quite sure until you see the box kind of like coming up behind her and like opening to catch her. I thought that was just beautifully, beautifully well done, and it was a great way of blending sort of the old with the new. And this theme of legacy, I think you're right, Will, is such a big throughput of really the last third of this movie, right? And now there's sort of this new legacy, right? We have this new little girl, Abra, who has the shine, and she's the most powerful shine ever, apparently, because she's the chosen one, Anakin. But I don't know if we'll ever get a follow up movie to Doctor Sleep. But what do you guys think of her as like a character on her own? Like, do you think we could have an Abra as an adult Shining movie?
I, I
Oh
don't,
boy.
and I'm okay with that because I think this story is the story of the Torrances. Like it's the story of like the effect of the Overlook and all of that. And I think that what Abra lacks is that connection to the stuff that happened at the original Overlook. So her journey going forward, if we were to follow it, would be much more based on the experiences of this film. And I think that you would get diminishing returns following just here. I like leaving it there, that we have this there's this theme through this movie too about how people with the shine are much less likely to manifest, or that maybe even know about it. Maybe it's because, like, when someone is a little bit weird, we put them immediately on Ritalin, or we immediately institutionalize them, or we slap them in front of an iPad and say, "Here, watch this. It'll get your mind off of all those crazy thoughts you're having." And so there's something sort of nice about knowing that there's this character who still has this connection to this otherworldly thing, sort of carrying that torch forward. And we don't necessarily need to see, at least for me, I don't need to see where she's going.
Mm.
I just need to be able to see that she's carrying that torch into the
Mm.
darkness ahead. I like just sort of the unknown of what's to come.
Sammy W in the chat, who we just had the pleasure of spending a weekend with in a cabin up in northern Arizona. Hey, Sammy, good to see you, even if just virtually. Says, I want a Shining franchise. Abra is a Torrance, though. So, Will,
And
is that
that's
from the book?
Yeah,
Wait a minute.
it's
Whoa. Hold on. Hold on. Where
yeah.
is it established in the movie timeline that she's a Torrance?
It's not in the book, and it's one of the things that they cut out, and I personally am glad they did. You find out that Lucy, who is Abra's mom, is the half sister of Danny. They both had
This is
Jack as the father, and so there's a blood link leading to him. And I think that that sort of undermined. It's fine for the book, but I think that it would have very much undermined the story that they were telling here in the movie to have that connection.
Yeah, my eyes would have rolled. Like you mentioned, this is a story of the Torrances, and all in my mind, it's like, oh, this is like the Skywalker thing all over again, um, kind of in a way. Like both families are kind of coming to a close here in this year's movies. Maybe, I don't know. We don't know about Star Wars yet and the Skywalkers, but J.P. Wendell also says that there could be something totally different as a spin-off, because I think somebody said that Rose at one point says that she could see darkness in Abra. So maybe, I don't know if that was wishful thinking, like, hey, come on and join our dark side, or there's really something there that she could turn into the next Rose the Hat.
I
You know
think
what
it would be
I don't know.
fascinating to see Abra become a villain. She definitely has that darkness for me. I mean, she was fucking evil. Like, even though she knew, Rose was not a good person or whatever, like, fucking blowing her up in a grocery store. Like, even before there was a direct confrontation, like, when Rose comes in her mind, she's, like, torturing her. Like, and she's, like, what, an 11-year-old girl or something, 13-year-old girl, I don't remember how old she is, but like that's a big leap to go from, hey, there's this thing out there that's trying to find me, to I'm gonna fucking torture you.
Hamstrike does mention something else in chat that I think is probably more my speed, and he says, "Sign me up for a True Knot prequel." And I'm thinking about, I don't know if you guys watched this show. I think it was HBO, maybe it was Showtime, but it was called Carnival.
Yeah.
I could totally see like a sort of that aesthetic like applied to a prequel series, like a 6 or 8 episode like HBO series that's about the True Knot over the years or something like that. Like, I think that would be compelling as fuck. So I would be on board for that.
I feel like I got
I
that
heard
with the circus characters on Heroes. I'm good.
Well, I mean, somebody said that this really was kind of like the True Knot was kind of like an X-Men group, like a dark set of X-Men. Like they had their powers, and they kind of set themselves apart and had this kind of team thing going on. What did you guys think of the way that they like killed when they died? Like the effect of like them just totally like kind of waffling in and out of like existence, and then finally like turning into poof.
I thought it made sense for like the older character who'd been around for thousands of years, because like the magic or whatever that was keeping him like at that age, poof, disappeared. But like the newest recruit to the True Knot, the Pusher, Snakebite Andy, I was actually surprised to see that same effect with her, because it's not like thousands of years of decay are catching up with her. Like, she was a human 3 days ago. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That didn't really work so well for me with Andy.
Yeah.
But the others, I mean, because they were many hundreds of years old, I'm cool with.
At this point, like, aside from Andy, who, like, I mean, the most her body would have been decayed or whatever would have been like, was it 7 years or something like that? Well, it was a very short period from like the one period to the present, when the movie scene to the present. But everyone else is either thousands of years old or age unknown, so we can just assume whatever, right? And they all exist now as essentially these beings of like psychic energy, because that's what The Shining is, right? It's some sort of like psychic energy or whatever, and they only exist because they're drawing this psychic energy out of other people. So I was totally on board with that. Yeah, I probably, they could have done maybe something different with the Snakebite Andy, maybe had her body just like maybe just like it mostly poofed out, but you also see sort of like a husky body, not a husky body, but like a husk of a body, or something like that. That could have been fine.
Yeah, that gunfight shootout was kind of crazy, but it kind of came out of nowhere. But the thing that got me was I talked a little bit about the rules not being super clear to me, like the rules of this true not coexistence and these people. Did they only feed off of the steam or energy of people who had the shine, and was that
Yes.
established? And did they offer them all a chance to join before they were killed? I don't understand the rules of like who got to live and who they were just interested in killing. And they didn't establish that everybody had the shine, like the Jacob Tremblay character, the little girl at the beginning.
They did, though.
Did they?
Yeah.
They did,
Yeah.
because every single, like with him, like someone in the stands was like, wow, he always knows when to swing or something like that, sort of showing
Oh,
that
I see.
he didn't necessarily have like the big shine or whatever, but he had at least some of that like knack. And I think that's what they were mostly feeding on.
Right.
Like these little snack of people around that they could get are just these people who maybe just have the knack, but they
And
were
don't
looking
really know what it is yet.
but they were looking for the whale,
Right.
like the person that would feed them forever and ever, and that's how they come
fun
across
trivia at the baseball game when they're having that conversation, it's the original actor who played Danny Torrance that's participating in that discussion about Jacob Tremblay.
Yeah, I heard that too.
And
I was trying to figure out which character he was going to be in the movie, because I had heard that he was in the movie, and I actually thought he was the magician at the kids' party, like early on in the movie. But it wasn't him. It was one of the two dads or relatives sitting at the Little League baseball game.
And as for who they offer it to and who don't, I think like they made a big point about Snakebite Andy. Is like, we haven't had a pusher in a while, so I think it was her abilities and the fact that they saw that she was pretty okay with using her powers for not so good means. I think they pretty much saw like, hey, she could be one of us and she could be useful. Whereas like, oh, the kid who knows when to swing, he's a better meal than he is someone that we have to feed. And Rose even makes a point at the end, and I don't know whether or not to believe her or not, and I think that's okay. She makes the point as she's sort of bargaining with Abra, like, we would have offered it to you too. And I love in that moment that up until that point she hadn't quite said that, so I didn't quite know if she was just using that to sort of like get herself out of a scrape there, or if maybe she did see something, that darkness in her, and maybe wanted her as part of their group as well. But I think that it would take someone like that to join the True
And
Knot.
she even mentioned it at the end when she's talking to Dan on the famous, stairwell where Jack was going to beat the fucking brains out of Shelley Duvall's character. She even says to him, like, how did we miss you? Like, we would have offered this to you. And I think it's pretty interesting that the rampant alcoholism of Dan, like, kind of put him off their radar, right? It tamped his shine down far enough that he never popped up for them.
And how's that for like a neat little, like, I mean, a blunt metaphor, but like a good one regardless, of just how, like, addiction and these types of negative behaviors can dull your shine, can take away the thing that makes you unique.
Yeah, it's a good point. And probably in a book, people who've read the book would pick up on some of these things a lot quicker than just kind of someone coming in cold and watching the movie and catching, like, and knowing going in that these people went after only people who had the shine, and how, I don't know. Some of the things were a little bit just barely touched on in the movie, and it confused me a little bit. Maybe I need to pay more attention to those details.
I just love that it, as Dan realized that Abra was in trouble, finally he was like, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
That's funny, is
That's another one.
That moment when Dan like takes a break and has like a 4-minute like song and dance break towards the end of the movie. Like, I was inspired and moved by that.
Yeah, and Hamstrack even says that it's a missed opportunity not using Pink Floyd's Shine On You Crazy Diamond.
Oh, how about that? Or at the end, when everything turns out okay and Abra's happy, shiny happy people. Could have worked.
There you go.
Abracadabra. I want to reach out and grab you. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of songs that have shine in them, is I think what we're
It's
saying.
they're so shiny.
But I mean, yeah, this is going to be one that I'll be excited to revisit it again. Like, I think that no movie is like The Shining is like seriously, it's one of like my top 10, like of all time, and so I have to remember that whenever I'm watching any sequel that they were going to make of it, it was going to be impossible for the sequel to one of the best 10 films of all time to also be one of the best 10 films of all time, unless you're The Godfather, I guess. So outside of that, like taking that expectation bar out of it, I think this really overshot what it should have. I think that it was really impressive to just see sort of the marrying of all of these things. I also enjoyed seeing they put an indigenous actor in Zahn McClarnon in as the Crow Daddy, who I thought was really nice to see on screen as well. He was he was the second in command of the True Knot, and he was even though he was only a mini boss, he was formidable for the scenes that he was on, and I liked seeing that.
That was really good. I liked him too, and I also liked Dan's friend from the meetings, right?
Billy.
Billy, yeah, the guy who was kind of helping him out. I really liked him a lot too. One thing I'm surprised more people in our community were not bitching about online is in the Shining scenes. They pulled in every single freaking notable character in out of a box to murder Rose the Hat, except for the blowjob bear. Where was the blowjob bear?
Obviously, the blowjob bear and the guy getting the blowjob and the blowjob bear obviously never left that room to come after Danny. They were having fun, you know what I mean? So I bet they're still in that room blowing each other.
I'm very happy about that, because the idea of the blowjob bear with his ass flapping in the wind going after young Danny Torrance is not one that I want to imagine.
No, but
so I'm happy just leaving him in the room doing the thing that he does best.
Sam in the chat, Sam B from here in Tucson says, furries are too mainstream to be shocking now. LOL. Would you guys agree with that? Are furries like enough in the mainstream at this point that they wouldn't be shocking?
Certainly in my Twitter feed they are.
Well, I think so, because I think that if you think about it, like, of course, in the context of the movie, I don't know how much of furries were a thing in the 1980s. I just wasn't around for that. But even just within the last decade, furries went from being a punchline to being like actually they're just another group of people who have their own thing that may not be my thing, but it's great that it's their thing. So I know I've personally had a bit of a turnaround. I've probably made some pretty shitty jokes in the past, in seeing sort of like what the furry community has done, like a lot of them are like do a lot of like these really crazy like good like charity drives and stuff. I've been like okay, cool. So yeah, I think there is something to that, Sam. I think that furries are very mainstream. I think that people are familiar with what they are, and I think they've gotten over kind of the shock value, the kind of the LOL furry of it all,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And by the way, the lady in the bathtub, decaying lady in the bathtub, she's getting no respect in this movie, right? I mean, she has so many scenes of her in the bathtub, coming out of the bathtub, and she's there at the end. I don't know, man. She's just not getting the respect that she deserves. She keeps coming out of the bathtub, and nobody is impressed. So
anymore. That brings up a question for me, which I don't know. I guess I didn't quite understand something that happened in the movie. I thought Dan was telling Abra that since the Overlook burned down, it had purified the hotel and the site, and that all that stuff had gone away. And if that's true, how did Bathtub Lady come back? Like, if the place was purified and fixed, I didn't quite get that.
Well, I think maybe there's something to be said for, I think Dan did purify the grounds itself, but that last scene shows us that some of the things that haunt us, the legacies and all of that stuff, maybe they're always a part of us and they're always something that we're going to have to deal with. They're always going to be a part of our DNA. Not in her case, literally, since she's not a Torrance in this adaptation. But she was touched by that evil. She was experienced it, and she's always going to, in this case, probably quite literally carry around the scars of that trauma with her.
Mm-hmm. Now that vision existed before they went to the Overlook for her. It came to her early in the movie, didn't it?
The woman in the bathtub?
I thought the old lady in the bathtub.
I thought that was to Danny
at her home.
I thought that was Danny as a kid at the beginning of the movie. At his home, remember? Because he goes into the bathroom.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And there's a sort of a mirror image there too, because he does the exact same thing. He walks in, closes the door, locks her in the mind box,
fucks her up. Yeah.
And then we see Abra right at the end say, "Just a minute," goes in and closes the door the same way Danny did.
I would just like to say I had particular pleasure when Carl Lumbly showed up as Dick Halloran. I'm used to seeing him on Supergirl as Martian Manhunter's dad, and he's a telepath, so he's always speaking in people's minds. So then when he shows up as Halloran and he's telepathing with Danny as a kid, I don't know. I was pleased as punch. That was fun for me.
Huh. I wonder if he's going to be now typecast as the telepathic mentor figure.
Well, I mean, there's worse things you could be typecast as, I guess.
You know what? I'm going to put this out there now. If that's the case, Disney now owns all of the X-Men stuff. Let's put him in as our next Professor X. Let's just do that. He's already got kind of the shaved head look. Let's give him that telepathic mentor spot as well.
He fared way better in this movie than Scatman Crothers did in The Shining, right? I mean, Scatman leaves his vacation home in Miami, Florida, jumps on a plane, travels across the country to a snowstorm, gets in a rental car, gets in a snowcat, and goes to the Overlook and is only there for a minute and a half and gets killed right off the bat. At least this guy, will live on for a while. Same character though, right?
Yeah.
He is now forever a Force ghost.
Yeah.
All right. Well, any quick final thoughts before we wrap up for the evening on Dr. Sleep?
I'm good. I think I got it all out of my system.
Yeah, me too.
It's in a box.
All right. Excellent. Well, definitely a great conversation on Dr. Sleep. Want to give a big thank you to everyone who joined us in the live chat. There were a lot of comments. Sorry we didn't get to read all of them on air, but as always, you folks, great to have you join us. For those who've joined through iTunes or Stitcher, Apple Music, whatever your way of accessing the show is, we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So be sure to, let us know what you think in the comments on the YouTube version of the show. Feel free to hop on Facebook. Let us know what you thought. We'd love to talk more. In between now and next week's episode, Jim, where can people find you online?
Find me on Twitter at JJP Out West. Those are my initials, Out West. And also on Facebook under my name, Jim Pugliafico.
All right. Excellent. And Will, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Whatever Cove. You can find me on Facebook. I'd be happy to connect with you there as well. Just look for William Lindis. And I'm also on Letterboxd and pretty active there. Just search for William Lindis. Add me. I'll follow you back.
All right. And you can find me on Facebook. Just search for Brad Harris. I'm the one that probably has Chub, Chaser, Bear friends in common with you. Also, you can find me on Twitter at iBradPro. Folks, it's been great. Thanks so much for joining us this week, and we will see you all next time. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.